I was petrified about it, by the way. And, we got through it. And I think it was during that time period when I started to think about things.
Heartbreaking situation will surprise you, revealing a side of Simon Cowell that few have ever seen. As one reporter put it, this changes everything, the beginning of everything, the beginning of everything. February 14th, 2014 changed Simon Cowell's life forever. It wasn't just another Valentine's Day. It was the day Eric Philip Cowell was born to the world. And with him came a transformation that nobody saw coming. Simon had always been the bachelor of the entertainment world. He was famous for saying he'd never have kids, claiming he was too old and too set in his ways. But when Eric arrived, everything shifted. The man who once lived only for his TV shows and record deals suddenly found himself thinking about someone else first. After I lost my parents, I genuinely felt I would never feel that kind of love for anyone ever again, Simon shared in a rare emotional moment. It thought that was it until I saw the scan of him for the first time. From that moment I saw the scan, I was like the Tizit. I'm besotted. Eric wasn't just any celebrity baby. He was named after Simon's father, Eric Selick Philip Cowell, carrying forward a family legacy that meant everything to the entertainment mogul. From the very beginning, Simon made it clear that Eric would be different. He wouldn't be spoiled like other celebrity children. He would learn the value of hard work, but as Eric grew older, Simon began noticing things that other parents might not see. Little moments that made him pause. These weren't necessarily concerning moments, but they were different enough to catch Simon's attention. The early years were filled with joy, but there were also questions. Eric was developing at his own pace, and Simon found himself becoming more protective than he'd ever imagined possible. He began turning down projects that would require him to be away from home for too long. He began scheduling his life around Eric's needs rather than his own career demands. What Simon didn't know was that these early observations would later become pieces of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that would eventually lead to the heartbreaking diagnosis that would shake his world to its core. A father's growing concerns as Eric grew from a toddler into a young child. Simon Cowell's protective instincts only intensified, but it wasn't just typical parental worry. There was something deeper happening. Simon began to notice something that made him question whether Eric's development was following the same path as that of other children his age. Eric had always been a quiet child, but as he approached his second birthday, Simon realized something significant. Eric still wasn't speaking. While other children his age were forming words and short sentences, Eric remained largely silent. Simon tried to convince himself that Eric was simply a late talker, but the worry always lingered beneath the surface. The entertainment industry is full of noise, bright lights, and constant stimulation. During public appearances, Eric would often cover his ears or seem overwhelmed by the chaos around him. Simon initially thought this was normal. After all, he was just a small child in a very adult world. But as these reactions continued, Simon began to wonder if there was more to it. Friends and family tried to reassure Simon that every child develops differently. Some children simply take longer to start speaking than others, they would say, but Simon's instincts told him something else was happening. He'd built his career on reading people, on understanding what made them tick. With Eric, he sensed there was a complexity he couldn't quite grasp. The sleepless nights began around this time. Simon would lie awake thinking about Eric's future, wondering if he was missing something important. He started researching child development, reading about different conditions and possibilities. The more he learned, the more questions he had. What made it even more difficult was Eric's intelligence. The boy was clearly bright, observant, and capable of understanding complex situations. He just expressed himself differently from other children. Simon began to realize that traditional milestones might not apply to his son. Eric was creating his own timeline, his own way of experiencing the world. Simon's concern wasn't about Eric being different. It was about making sure Eric had everything he needed to thrive. The father, who once measured success in record sales and TV ratings, now found himself measuring success in much smaller, more precious moments. A smile from Eric, a moment of connection, a breakthrough in communication. But even as Simon adapted to Eric's unique way of being, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading towards something bigger, something that would require more than just patience and love. Something that would test everything Hedhod he knew about being a father. The world watches, the world watches. While Simon Cowell was privately grappling with his concerns about Eric's development, the public remained largely unaware of the internal struggle happening behind closed doors. To the outside world, Simon was still the sharp-tongued judge who could make or break careers with a single comment. But those close to him began noticing subtle changes in his behavior. Eric had made a few public appearances, including a memorable moment on Britain's Got Talent where he gave an act the golden buzzer. The audience loved seeing Simon's softer side, watching him interact with his son. But what they didn't see were the careful preparations that went into those moments. Simon had learned to create controlled environments where Eric could feel comfortable and safe. Soon, the media started picking up on Simon's transformation. Headlines would read about how fatherhood had changed the notorious bachelor. But they were missing the deeper story. Simon wasn't just becoming a gentler person. He was becoming an advocate for a child who experienced the world differently than most. Behind the scenes, Simon was making significant changes to his professional life. He started declining projects that would take him away from Eric for extended periods. He restructured his schedule to ensure he could be present for the important moments. His business partners initially thought this was just typical new parent behavior, but Simon's commitment to being available for Eric went deeper than anyone realized. The speculation about Eric's development began quietly in online forums and social media discussions. Some people noticed that Eric seemed different during his public appearances. Others commented on how protective Simon's speculation had become, but Simon refused to engage with the speculation. He understood that Eric's privacy was more important than satisfying public curiosity. What the public didn't know was that Simon was consulting with specialists, seeking answers to questions that kept him awake each night. He was learning about different developmental paths, exploring resources that could help Eric reach his full potential. Every consultation, every appointment, every conversation with an expert was another step toward understanding what his son needed. The irony wasn't lost on Simon. He'd spent his career judging others, deciding who was ready for the spotlight and who wasn't. Now he was learning that readiness looks different for everyone. Eric was teaching him that success couldn't be measured by traditional standards. Some of the most beautiful moments happened away from cameras in quiet spaces where Eric felt free to be himself. As the speculation continued to grow, Simon realized that they would eventually need to address the questions surrounding Eric's development. Simon Cowell sat in a small office, across from a team of specialists who had been evaluating Eric for several months. The words autism spectrum disorder hung in the air like a weight that would forever change how Simon understood his son's future. The lead developmental pediatrician spoke gently, but clearly. Eric shows significant characteristics consistent with autism spectrum disorder. His challenges with verbal communication, his sensory sensitivities, and his need for routine all point to this diagnosis. Simon felt his world shift in that moment. Not because the diagnosis was unexpected, he'd been preparing for this possibility for months, but because it made everything real. Eric would need specialized support, therapies, and an understanding that the world wasn't always ready to provide. What does this mean for his future? Simon asked, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it in public. The pediatrician smiled warmly. It means Eric will experience the world differently from other children, but with the right support, he can absolutely thrive. Many children with autism go on to live fulfilling, successful lives. The diagnostic report was comprehensive, detailing Eric's strengths alongside his challenges. While Eric struggled with verbal communication and social interaction, he showed remarkable abilities in pattern recognition and visual processing. The report noted his intense focus on subjects that interested him and his Ability to remember complex sequences. Simon learned that Eric's autism was what professionals called moderate. He would need significant support in some areas, but he also had many capabilities that could be developed with proper intervention. The key was understanding how Eric's brain worked and adapting the world around him to meet his needs. The hardest part wasn't the diagnosis itself. It was thinking about how to tell the world. Simon had spent his career in the spotlight, but Eric's privacy was paramount. How do you protect a child from public scrutiny while also advocating for understanding and acceptance? That evening, Simon sat with Eric, watching him carefully arrange his toy cars in perfect lines. Eric's focus was intense, almost meditative. In that moment, Simon realized something profound. Eric wasn't broken or damaged. He was simply different. And that difference came with its own kind of beauty. The diagnosis also brought clarity to Simon's behavior. Over the past few years, his increased protectiveness, his schedule changes, his reluctance to put Eric in overwhelming situations, all of it made sense now. He'd been instinctively adapting to Eric's needs before he even understood what those needs were. But with the diagnosis came new responsibilities. Eric would need speech therapy, occupational therapy, and behavioral support. Simon would need to learn about autism, about advocacy, about creating a world where Eric could succeed. The entertainment mogul was about to become something else entirely. A father fighting for his son's future in a world that didn't always understand. Behind closed doors, after Eric's diagnosis, Simon Cowell's life transformed in ways that no one outside his inner circle could have imagined. The man who once thrived on chaos and unpredictability became a master of routine and structure with every day carefully planned to give Eric the stability he needed to thrive. Simon's Malibu home was redesigned with Eric's sensory needs in mind. Simon spared no expense in creating an environment where Eric could feel safe and comfortable. The daily routine became sacred. Eric needed predictability, so Simon structured his schedule around speech therapy sessions, occupational therapy appointments, and carefully planned social interactions. What looked like a simple play date required hours of preparation, ensuring Eric would be in the right mindset, and Simon began turning down more projects, delegating responsibilities to trusted colleagues. His business partners noticed the changes, but didn't fully understand the reason behind them. Simon wasn't just becoming a more hands-on father. He was becoming Eric's primary advocate and support system. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part. Simon couldn't discuss Eric's challenges openly without risking his son's privacy. He felt alone in navigating this new reality, carrying the weight off decisions that would affect Eric as the weight of decisions' entire future. Every choice about therapy, schooling, and social interaction felt monumental. Late at night, Simon would sit in Eric's room watching his son sleep peacefully. In those quiet moments, he felt the full weight of responsibility. Eric was depending on him to create a world where he could succeed. The man who had built an empire on judging others now faced the ultimate test, being the father Eric needed him to be. The sadness wasn't for Eric's autism. It was for the world's inability to see Eric's unique gifts. Simon knew his son was extraordinary, but he also knew that not everyone would understand or appreciate Eric's different way of experiencing life. It's sad that the world might not be ready for someone as special as Eric. The public struggle. As 2019 progressed, Simon Cowell found himself facing an impossible dilemma. Rumors and speculation about Eric's development had begun